Year's Eve and New Year's Day is a it's really strange time around the church. Our budget is about $1 million a year, and when we hit New Year's Eve and our budget has been made, it's yay, we took in $1 million, and we broke even or made a little bit of money. Then you move to January 1st, all of that is gone. You're like, oh my God, I got to bring in or make $1 million, and it just seems to be overwhelming. But it always happens. I can remember maybe 4 years in the history of this church when we actually ended up losing at the end of the year. And part of that was because of recession, part of that was something else. But I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation in that, because you're the ones that make it happen. No big donor comes in here and writes $1 million check and says, here, go have fun. It's each and every one of you that comes on Sunday morning, or you're an ambassador, which is the greatest way that you can serve this church. That means that your gifts are consistent. Doesn't make any difference how much, but we can count on them, and that helps us budget a little better. In regards to New Year's Eve, my cousin Ozzy came down to visit me. And for those of you who don't know him, he always seems to get himself in some sort of a jam. But with that, he always has kind of a good news, bad news spin on it. So New Year's Eve, we go out for dinner, had a wonderful time. I decided to go home. He decided to go out a little bit and celebrate. He wanted to hoot it up. So he went down to JJ's, just down the street. If you haven't been there, it's one of the finest restaurants in the plaza. A good friend of mine runs it. So he went down there and had a good time. But before he left, I told him, I said, you're going to have to be careful because the police will be out doing road checks for people who are driving while intoxicated. So be safe, be smart, and if necessary, take a taxi home. Well, the next morning I wake up to discover Ozzy made it home safe and sound. When he got up, I said, Ozzy, how did things go? He said, well, I have good news and bad news. He says, the good news is things did get a little bit out of hand, but I took a taxi home. And just as you said, on the way home, there was a police stop checking for intoxicated drivers. But since I was in a taxi, and they just passed me by. Terrific. I'm proud of the good sense you used. What's the bad news? He says, well, I parked the taxi in your garage because I forgot where I got it. Some of you are way ahead of me on that. You probably saw it on the internet. But it came forth from Cousin Ozzy. Let me say that. You know, there's always good news and bad news. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're always going to run into good news and bad news. And based on what we read in the newspapers or what we hear on TV or on the radio, or some of the common assumptions that we take on, it seems to be that the news is primarily bad. Some people even seem to think that our country or our world is going to hell in a handbasket. But I can guarantee you this, that for every negative thing, there are 10 positive things. That just isn't Pollyanna and platitude. That is a truism. For every negative thing you have in your life, there are 10 positive things that you might not be aware of. You know, global warming, greenhouse gases, bad news. But in 2016, 800,000 volunteers in India planted 50 million trees in one day. Now that's good news. India was plagued with the consciousness of not really caring for their environment or the atmosphere. So you think of what those 50 million trees are going to do in years to come, if not hundreds of years to come. That's good news. Oil spills and gas spills have been averaging about 25 a year. In 2016, there were 2. That's good news. The tiger, which was heading towards extinction, reversed that, and the population is the highest it's been in 25 years. That's good news. They developed an airplane that flew around the world non-stop without using a single drop of fuel. That's incredible. That's good news. Teen pregnancies are down. High school graduations are up. Dementia, different types of cancer are on the decline. And malaria, one of the worst diseases in the world that affects half the population is on the decline. As a matter of fact, Sri Lanka, which is a small country just off the coast of India, has eradicated the disease altogether. This is a disease that kills 1,000 children every single day. And Sri Lanka has eradicated the disease, and there's 27 other countries that are on that same course. Lots and lots of good news. But that doesn't mean that we can skip on down the road whistling our cares away. We still have problems to solve. We still have things that we have to face and we have to resolve. There are still issues in the world and conditions in the world, whatever they might be, that aren't healthy for us, whether it be mentally, physically, or emotionally. Now, what it does tell us with the good news that came forth in 2016 is that we can do it. That we have the intelligence, we have the strength, we have the power, we have the resources to solve the problems that face us. All we have to do is focus our attention on them, and the solutions will arise. And that's not only true in the world, but that's true in your life as well. You have the power, you have the strength, you have the wisdom, you have the resources to overcome or solve any problem or challenge in your life that hampers with your peace of mind and your sense of well-being. That is a God-given right. You know, for years, I was terrified of public speaking. It was a huge problem in my life. When I was in high school, speech class was mandatory. I couldn't do it. I flunked the class and had to go to summer school just to graduate because I couldn't stand up in front of a crowd and publicly speak to them. It was tormenting for me. When I got into seminary, it became even a bigger problem. I wondered, you know, if I don't want to talk in front of people, what am I doing here? It just seemed ludicrous. And I struggled through it, and I struggled through it, until one day it came to the point where I thought, why? Why do I got this problem? How come other people can come up and speak so comfortably and so fluently, and yet it scares me? I'm fearful. I don't want to do it. I back away from it. And then it went to, well, what is wrong with me? Is there something missing? Why don't I have that talent? So I began to engage myself in therapy as well as do some self-study. And I went back, and I remember when I was in the second grade, music class was just beginning, and some person who I'd never seen before came and took me out of class. And she took me down to a small office on the other side of the school, and my parents were there. I'm in second grade now, 6 years old. So we go in, and the speech therapist, who she turned out to be, began to explain to my parents that I had what they call a lazy jaw. And because of that lazy jaw, I couldn't pronounce certain words properly, and I slurred a lot of words. And so she suggested to my parents that I skip out of music class for the rest of the year and go to speech therapy. She also suggested to my parents that the family could help. At home, if I slurred a word or mispronounced a word, I was to be interrupted and made to say that word again and again and again until finally it came close to being right. Well, eventually this leaked out to the rest of the kids in the school, and it became a subject of teasing on the playground. 6 years old, and my life was just hell because of all of this thing. So I got to the point where, in a 6-year-old mind, the best way to solve this is just don't talk. Just be quiet. You can respond with yes or no. You know how to pronounce that. But just be silent. And so I did that. I kind of shut down. Well, the time passed. I grew up. I forgot all about that experience and went on about my life. Until I got to high school, speech class, that fear set in. Then seminary, that fear set in. And I began to remember back when I was taught that I didn't talk right, and that I was different from the rest of the kids because I couldn't speak properly. And so I began to wonder, why did that carry forward after all of these years? Why is it still with me? And I discovered why. It's all about the mind. Now, the mind has 3 different functions. and I'm not going to go into a huge lecture on this, but it has three different functions. First of all, there's the conscious mind, and that is what is here and now. The conscious mind perceives whatever's going on around us. It collects the information. It defines what's going on around us. If it, in computer language, it's like what's on the screen now. Then there's a subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind has stored everything that's ever happened to you that had an emotional charge to it, like being taken out of school and put into speech therapy. The subconscious mind stores everything that had emotional charge to it that's happened in your entire life. Now, I'm going to get to the third function of the mind in probably next week, but I want to function on these two right now. So if you're a young child, 2, 3, 4 years old, and you raised in a negative environment, or you had a teacher that was especially harsh, or some other person that criticized you harshly, what they said, their voice, their message, was stored in your subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind is not the bad guy here. The subconscious mind is essential, so we don't have to stop and rethink everything every time we come to some sort of a decision. You know, back in the primordial days, if we were with a friend and the friend got attacked by a tiger and eaten, that was stored in the subconscious mind to warn us, see a tiger, run. Don't stick around. But as in this day and age, as children, all of those messages that were sent to us in a negative manner that hurt us and that caused pain were stored. And so when we run into a situation where somebody is being critical of us or harshly judgmental of us, or we read in the newspaper or other sources of information come to us that put us down or that make us feel not good, that information is sent to the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind says, because you're not good. You're not good enough. You never were. You were always making mistakes. All those things, those normal, natural things that happen that we're criticized for, that message we got comes out when we're exploring different situations and circumstances in life today. I have a lot of gay and transgender friends who, for most of their lives, denied themselves because they grew up, before they were even out, they grew up hearing that homosexuality is bad, hearing faggot, hearing or seeing people marching on the streets with signs telling them to go to hell or to die, and all of those childhood things begin to come back, and so they denied themselves the right of being who they actually are. Now, the good news is, just as I said, the subconscious mind is not the enemy. There is an aspect to it that we call the bully voice or the internal critic. And that internal critic is like a constant commentary. It's continually reviewing whatever's going on around us, and it causes irritation, it causes anger, it causes resentment, it causes hurt, it causes pain, because it identifies with things out there, internalizes it, and causes us believe that we're the fault of what is going on. If you've ever been rejected, you know the pain, because it goes into the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind goes, well, because you're not lovable. You never were. Your Uncle Harry told you that when you were 6 years old. You're just not a lovable person. Or if you make a mistake or you cause a problem, and that voice, that critical voice comes out and says, you've always caused problems because you're just not smart enough to know better. All of those things come forward. But the bully voice isn't the enemy either. It's simply the recording device of what has happened and then providing us with that information in a non-emotional way. The subconscious is non-emotional, but it provides us with the information, then we emotionalize it based on how we felt when all of those things happened to us as a youngster. So this series that we're starting today, it's going to be a 4-week series, and I'm really excited about it because it is all about calming down that inner critic. It's all about coming to grips where we can accept ourselves unconditionally. It's about quieting the voice. And in doing that, there are 2 things that we're going to start with, and each week you'll get a principle of sort that you can practice. But there's 2 things that we can start with, and the first thing is awareness or mindfulness. When that voice goes off, and for some of it's constant, we don't even recognize it when it's speaking to us, but when it goes off, become aware of it. Aha, there's the bully voice. And the second step is to respond with a pause and then say something that's exactly the opposite. If you do something that really messes things up, and that bully voice says, you're stupid, you always have been, you just can't seem to get things right, pause. Now, that's not true. I did this right. I did that right. I graduated from high school. I went to college. I did whatever things in my life that I can call a success. So don't tell me that I can never do anything right. And what this is called is neuroplasticity. And that's a big word. You don't even have to remember it. But science has discovered that the mind can be reworked. Whatever your belief system is at this point, it can be expanded upon, the consciousness can be increased, and you can move beyond any of those thoughts, feelings, attitudes, or perceptions that cause you to be in misery, to be in pain. That voice within can oftentimes be sharp, it can be harshly critical, it can be judgmental, it can hurt, it can cause you pain, because it's a childhood voices for some little 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, and that heard an authoritative figure or a group of kids in the playground say something, and at that point they took it to be true. As children, we don't have discernment. If somebody says something to a 4-year-old, they take that in and they believe it to be true. And that part of the brain that ushers in discernment doesn't come until our late teens or early adults. Right now, if somebody came in and said something to you that was of a derogatory nature, you would probably know, well, that's not true, and I'm not going to absorb it. But back then, we took in everything. So basically, what this theory is about is just going in and freshening up the mind and moving things aside and letting them diminish because we're not thinking about them. Whatever we think about expands. We know that. If you think about the negative in your life is going to expand. If you think about the positive is going to expand. So in this process, this mindfulness process is being aware of when that voice comes in, and with compassion, not in a militaristic style, not with a bully against bully style, but with compassion, just gently pause, say, that isn't true. State what is true. Now, it took us 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, maybe even 90 for some of us, to get to this point. So changing the contents of the mind doesn't come just by going into meditation and saying everything is okay with me and everything that's bad isn't. What it does mean is moving to that point where we're going to apply ourselves for a certain amount of time. It usually takes a month, maybe 2 months, but if you're consistent with it, that voice, that critical voice. Is there anybody else that has that voice in their head? It just dawned on me, I might be the only one because of that speech therapist. But we all have it. We all have it, and sometimes we think we're the only ones that have it, that nobody else does. And we feel that it's a part of us that's treating us badly because we are bad. And that is not the truth at all. So we're going to move into meditation here in a moment, but I want you to think a little bit about the critical voice that you hear now and then. And ask yourself, does it serve any purpose? No, it doesn't. Ask yourself, is it redundant? Yes, it is. Tell yourself that the voice is based on a 4-year-old's experience. And now you're at the point where you're going to create your own experience in your life. We'll now move into meditation.